Hello, so who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, thanks, Dai. My name's Richard Dunne. I'm a senior leader in EHS for large CPG organizations.
So how did you get started in your career?
I actually started out as operations. That was my initial sort of training out of college in engineering and manufacturing. And after a number of years in a couple of really awesome organizations, I started picking up some, bespoke EHS and quality projects. And I genuinely went into those with a view to say, this would make me a better, more rounded operations leader. So it'd be good to experience that side of the table a little bit. But when I got into it, it really excited me. I felt a connection to the purpose of what it really was. It was more than just getting the cases out the door. This was about people, and that really connected with me at the emotional level, really. And then there was opportunities, thankfully, through my organization to progress over the years that followed. So I found myself actually pivoting more into a channel of EHS leadership, and at the time that also saw me move from Ireland, where I started out, over to the US in 2008, and have continued ever since.
Yeah, I was going to say the Irish accent was took me back when we met outside, and I kind of started that conversation. It was like, oh no, I was expecting American, and I didn't get. So obviously, we're at the North American event.
So 17 years, I think I've managed to hang on to some of it at least. I haven't lost it all. When I go home to visit, they all tell me I've got an American accent though. So,
so where in Ireland are you from?
So we live from Ireland. Originally just north of Dublin, County Meath, north of Dublin.
Right, okay.
So I spent most of my career in Dublin. And now in the US, we live in Connecticut.
I think the weirdest thing about meeting people in this industry, before coming into health and safety and my kind of perception of what people in health and safety would be versus what I've learned, and actually it's a really caring, empathetic profession, which I think is kind of not what you think of when you think of people who do that for a living.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's a big part of what that brought me into it in a deeper way, is because it is about people. And there's really nothing more powerful than the people you're working for and working with. I think some people get into it from a very technical standpoint, right? They're genuinely, fascinated and intrigued by the science behind it and some of the psychology behind, great EHS performance and practice. But I think invariably everybody ultimately has that connection to the people aspect of what we're here to do, right? We're here to save lives, protect people, make sure they go home in the same way as they came in every day for work. So, and it's a very fulfilling line of work to be in.
A lot of the people that I've spoken to in the last probably couple of years, especially, there's been that conversation about, and it happened again today, funny enough, in the first the panel conversation about that. How do we get health and safety talked about at the C-suite table? And that's at that top table. Why is it still being pushed back? And I think it's been really interesting to see my perception changed of the performance elements. Where you said that some people get into it from a performance side, because you do have that. Everyone has, we want everyone to get home safe. That's kind of and you hear that from everyone, and then you get the performance side in. And I think anyone outside of the industry would be thinking it's more about the performance than it is the people.
Yeah, I've yet to meet a C-suite member who isn't fully behind the message of safety and the message of our people being our most important asset and protecting our people being the most important thing that we do. Nothing we do in our business is worth getting hurt for at the end of the day. And so I think we sometimes worry that we need to get the C-suite saying that. I don't think we've any trouble with them saying that. I think where EHS has that bridge to build is to say, well, you have to remember, though, that every day that C-suite meet, they're there to run that business and grow that business. So we need to present to them how we're helping them do that. Protecting our people is obviously critical to that.
Yeah.
But we also have to be part of that business's drive and growth. So the more that we find ways to connect in with what they think about every single day, as well as the safety of their people, which they have us there to ensure that that's happening. What else is driving them and motivating them every day? It's about growing the business. And how do we play a part in that? And how do we demonstrate the value of what we do in that?
I'd be curious as to whether you think that changed at some point, because I know that we do a lot of internal comms, so it's not just health and safety. We focus on kind of the HR side and various other sides. And there was a big switch in employer brand, became a really important thing. In about 2014, 2015, Google kind of changed the goalposts for, well, we're putting a ball put in. We're gonna have free food. We're gonna have childcare. We're gonna have, and suddenly employee engagement changed from being something that you kind of had to do to now you're going to lose employees if you weren't doing that. And health and safety seems, and I'm an outsider, so it'd be really interesting to get your thoughts on this, but it seems to have turned a corner in a similar way, in that the focus has become very much on, from an employee side, they want a safe environment now, and that's an important part of that recruitment process as well, and sort of retention.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, if you read in any psychology book, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, okay, what sits beneath people's sense of wellness and comfort is their sense of security. So first and foremost, you need to feel safe, right? I think the emphasis over the last 10 plus years on great places to work and making the working environment an enriching and working environment, and these organizations that have pioneered that and seen some huge benefits out of the the innovation and the energy they get out of that. But none of that will work if your employee is fundamentally working in an unsafe environment. Yeah. And I often talk about this when we talk about culture and development of safety culture. And one thing that's very important, and safety culture is critical to driving performance improvement, but you have to make sure that you're not doing that and forgetting about the baseline, meeting the base compliance needs. My favorite sort of make-up example is if I go out to a production area and ask the employee how are they feeling, and they say, well, I'm not feeling great because I have to stick my hand into this moving machine 5 times a day. I'm kind of asking the wrong question, right? It's not about how they feel. I'm actually missing one of the basics, the basic necessities in them doing their job safely. So making sure those home fires are being well tended to, and the baseline compliance expectation is being met. And when you have that, you've got a solid foundation to build cultural development and really start driving to leading and progressive in your safety approach. But too often, I think we are sometimes distracted by the next shiny thing and saying, oh, let's go and do this cultural development program and awareness for our employees, but yet actually the environment they're going into, or as the phrase I use, I'm going to send you into that door, be safe, but it's a room full of bear traps. It's like, let's fix that first, right?
I don't know. It's more interesting with the bear traps.
Maybe a better analogy.
Yeah. Well, as long as we're filming it, obviously from a content side, that's good health safety. How do they deal with the bear trap? Do they risk assess before they go any further? That's always the question.
Not much of a risk assessment, but yeah.
So we were talking before about kind of context. Obviously, for us, that's the big passion. It's about how do we engage people better, how do we communicate better, how do we train better. All of that side of things is kind of where we found our niche, but also where we feel really passionate. It's about empathy from our side of things. So, but we were talking about kind of that building on a foundation, and I know you'd had some interesting thoughts around how we do that, and I think everyone feels that they have some solution. I think as someone who works really closely in that part of the field, I was quite interested in what you had to say about that. So I mean, give me your thoughts about that.
Yeah, we talked about it earlier, and I think I was given another full of analogies today. But my analogy of like if you call a plumber to come to your house, right, and if the only qualification that plumber has is that they had a 50-page PowerPoint deck to learn how to plumb, do you think they'd do much of a good job, right? Probably not. Or they wouldn't know the one end of the sink from the other to fix. But that's not what we do. We do apprenticeships, right? Those trades do apprenticeships. So what do? They spend a year or two on the job with a qualified professional. They do the education. They probably spend a few months in college doing the educational piece, the academic piece, and then they spend a year or two out in the field with a qualified pro watching them do it. And then they spend a year or two with that same person watching them do it, the other way around. And that's how they learn, and that's how they embed the knowledge, right? It's adult learning at the end of the day. It's not rocket science. It's basic adult learning and how we all as adults learn. And I think that's a space that we've got to delve into in a much bigger way. We have, I think, as an industry, fallen victim to the death by PowerPoint scenario, and then think, well, everybody's trained, we check the box and move on. And then something goes wrong, and we go back and say, how did that happen? We trained them on this procedure. Well, it was on page 47 in the third paragraph of that training. Yeah. And is it really a surprise that they didn't remember that? So it's about making it very simple as well, but then making sure we follow through and get people in a place where they actually get to practice and prove out that they know this and they're retaining it. But you can't do that for everything. You can't hit them with a 40-page standard, an SOP, and expect them to retain it. It's not going to happen. You hear some of the gurus out there, the Sidney Deckers of this world, talk about the procedures in hospitals and how many of the procedures the actual staff know and can recite, and it's a fraction. And to actually to learn and read every section and every procedure would take them something like 50 or 100 years. So they're human beings. They find the way to make it work and navigate through that. So rather than hitting them constantly with that book, let's find the simple things. What do you need to know? And how do we make sure you retain that so that you do it right? So I do think that's another area of critical nature. When I talk about that maturity growth, that sits on that compliance, right? You start with those compliance pieces, but then you build the capability on top of the compliance, and now you can start to progress and really get the engine roaring, right?
So the compliance side of things, we have to tick a box, right? For insurance purposes, to cover ourselves, to all of those things, we have to some extent, tick a box to say that's done. Are we better to be looking at a journey where we start to say, well, instead of ticking those boxes within 3 months, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that they understand it. It's going to take us 9 months, right? But we're going to make sure that they actually understand it instead. I mean, is that kind of where you think the industry needs to be going, or do you feel like we need to just break down that 3 months of learning into a simpler format and say there's base first?
All right, let me give you the easy answer. It's a bit of both, right? We have to simplify it first and foremost, without doubt. But do we need to focus and make sure that the essentials are in place and well understood and retained, and that we have a way to make it sustainable? Absolutely, because once again, if we don't do that, it starts to crumble, and then we find ourselves out again, opening the door into that room full of bear traps, saying, "Go be safe." Right? How are you feeling today? Go be safe as you walk into the room full of bear traps. So if we don't have those basics in place, we're always going to be on shaky ground when we try and come out and say, now we're going to talk about more progressive, safety culture, awareness, observation, and being, understanding your mindset as you go into your workday, and are you tuned in the right way into your mindset? We think about some of the other industries, like the airline industry. I love taking analogies from how they operate. And in recent years, they've had an incredible safety record over the last 2 decades when you think about it and you look at the trends. Unfortunately, a couple of recent incidents. But, I mean, you look at the airline safety industry trends, they're incredible. And a lot of that in the last many years has been around the psychology of, the pilots. Are they, if they turn up for their shift that day, is their mind on the task? Did they get a good night's sleep? Have they got trouble at home? Are there things that could interrupt their ability to do their job right? Now, should we be worrying about that if the engine was about to fall apart? Again, it's like the bear trap example. It's the same principle. They have earned the right to work at that level because they're so buttoned up on the basics, right? There's no doubt that plane's going to fly. I think we all feel it. These planes are so reliable. So what else could go wrong? Well, the pilot could be having an off day and get something wrong. So now we'll go address that. So that's the way they've come at it when you think about it, in that maturity journey. So I think for all of us, and different industries are in different places on that journey, but I think in many organizations and in the CPG world, that's the challenge, is to make sure that we're building off of a solid foundation.
One of the HSE Global Series, I can't remember whether it was UK South or North, I met one of the safety team from Lufthansa, and she was on the safety side, she was a pilot, but she was a psychologist. And that was a really, really interesting conversation, to sit down and talk to someone who was covering those bases in different ways. It wasn't just coming from had kind of learned on the job, pilot, and had gone into safety. But you also had that background in psychology to be able to start applying that stuff as well. And that felt very progressive to see someone in that position doing like that, and she was wonderful. She was really, really interested. So if she sees this, I'd like to say, but let's catch up again. But do you feel like there are kind of those industries, and I'm not going to ask you to name any just to upset, because we don't upset anyone, but there are kind of like, there is a hierarchy here. Some people are further, some industries, not just businesses, but industries are further down that line than others.
You look across different categories and they're in different places, and some of it is driven by the nature of the risk. I mean, the airline industry is an obvious one, because if it goes wrong, it's catastrophic with masses of people affected, right? So the risks to the industry are so huge, and the risks to human life are so huge. You go to oil and gas, same thing. When it goes wrong, there's a large explosion and it affects a lot of people, right? And can kill a lot of people. So different industries have had to tackle this for different levels of risk. But the process is exactly the same. The sequence of how you go about boiling it down to what the compliance elements are, what's the cultural elements here, and how do you need to build that? It's the same principle. I think in lower risk industries where there's maybe lower statistics compared to those big ones, right? They might be a little bit further behind because there wasn't the same impetus maybe in the 80s to go and tackle it back then. So, when we listen to, Safety 2.0 and some of these principles, a lot of them are born out of those higher risk industries. But they absolutely play into all of us because it's the same psychology. At the end of the day, people are people and psychology is psychology. So the airline worker is no different. They're a human being just like the person who's packaging something in a plant. Yeah. They're both humans and they both respond and react to similar stimuli. Yeah. So it's not really, it should be agnostic of the industry ultimately. It's more about what are the industries that have had a bigger risk on the table that have needed to kind of push the boundaries in this, which for the rest of us is actually great because they've somewhat written the book to say this is how to do it. We just need to figure out how to apply it.
It does kind of bring us full circle. So obviously we're at an event in Nashville. We've flown out from Heathrow, so we're from the UK. But it is these communities that that need to be relied into for those learnings, though, right? It's how do we get people in the room together and get them talking. It's not just watch the speakers. It's get people around a table, hopefully this evening, and talking about their businesses and forming those communities. And it sounds like you've been part of this community for quite a long time now. Yeah. So, and have been to quite a few with the HSE Global events, by the sounds of things.
I've been to a few, yeah. It's been a few years, but great to be back at it, yeah.
So that sense of community within HSE then, I mean, tell me a little bit about that.
A lot of it has to do with the agenda of these forums, right? So, and, when Paul and I were talking about this a few months back, it was what really drew me to it is the deliberate shift here to say, we're in a room full of people who have the answers to your problem. I thought that theme ran through all the day today in our first day, which is spot on. It can be hard sometimes for people to open up and to actually get that out and aired, but that should be the intent and the purpose because, presentation after presentation, and now that's wonderful, a round of applause and on to the next thing, and just these packed agendas don't always get you there. And then you're looking for a few occasions to just pick away at the odd network, and that's good. But actually, if we could use the time in those that would be typical presentations into getting into problem solving, which is, I believe, how it's been structured, that's a different approach, and I do think that adds value. And it brings the right EHS professionals to the table. They're thinking, okay, I've got a conference coming up in 2 months. I'm going to bring my problems to it and hopefully get some answers that I can take home with me, right? The most effective conferences I've been at are usually the ones that are structured and deliver that, where you can come away after 2 days saying, I actually have something now I can take home and put into my business and bring to life instead of trying to come up with it in a dark room. So that's the value that these add.
But this whole audience does not seem to have the same ego that I've had in other industries that we deal with. I mean, obviously you get individuals. I met one in The Hague last year who was convinced that he knew all the answers and why was everyone not listening to him. It was quite an interesting conversation I had. But as a general rule, it does seem to be a community. It's very much there's a lot of respect for everyone across different areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's that post-event stuff, right? So how do we take what we've done here back to the workplace, and how are you going to apply that?
I think the first thing, and probably just to build on what this week has been about, I think is making sure that everybody coming here is coming with their problem. And not to be afraid to do that, to give some real thought going into it before we even get here, to say, what big problem am I hoping to get an answer for? Because if you have that thought through, you're going to get more value out of the session itself. And then, some kind of plenary, and we must talk to Paul about this, I guess, some kind of plenary that happens afterwards, maybe a couple of weeks out, with smaller groups to say, hey, if we had a small group of people that were working on a specific area and challenge, having a circle back to say, did that work for you? Or is there other opportunities for you to get more from it? Or did you wish that you'd spoken to a few other people that can help, put the finishing touches to what you're trying to do? I think that, because at the end of the day, every individual here is looking for help, right? They're looking for help. And if there's a way to help them through that, that's huge, right? I know I've gone to these forums in the past looking for help, and sometimes I get it, and it's tremendous when it works. So I think something in there, I don't know, it's probably something for the team to consider, but is there a way to circle back and say, did you get an answer to your problem? Did you get something out of that you were able to reapply? And maybe the answer is no, and that's okay. Well, then let's think about it for the next time. But I think reiterating that again and continuously improving it could be a big benefit.
Actually, specific problem thing, I think that's quite a interesting thing. I mean, I'll probably say it to Paul, and he'll go, "Yeah, I know," right?
And in fairness, there was some of that in the the run up to the session where we had to put in some thoughts and feedback. I don't know if we went to every delegate, but I know I think I filled it out and said, here's the areas that I'm most interested in understanding more of, or the areas that I've seen as challenges over the last couple of years that I'd like to get thoughts on and ideas on. So I think that was done to some extent, and so I'm sure Paul would turn around and say, "Stop, Richard, we're already doing all that," which is great of you.
Well, I know that that's been a big thing for him, is that kind of chatting to him pre-season of events. To be honest, there's been a lot of that. What do you take him home? That's been his real thing. Is, well, how are you going to apply these learnings afterwards? You know, and I think that's that's really good. But there is definitely something in the specifics of the problem.
Correct.
And how do we, through the suppliers as well. Obviously, there's kind of everyone here trying to sell to someone as well, because that's why we
that's part of it.
Yeah, of course. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a solution there. That doesn't mean that the suppliers aren't able to solve that problem. And so, if we can kind of get past that, I need to get a lead out of this and get it into I might have a solution here. Let's talk about that. I think that sales environment here, I feel, based on the other events I've been to, has been very different. It hasn't felt quite so pushed into the...
Yeah, I think so. I think the challenge is with I think within our EHS community, we've a lot of very technically accomplished people here. And making sure that they're not afraid to come out of their shell and actually be vulnerable in terms of what they think their problems are, and not be afraid to say, I actually don't have the answer to all of these things. I feel like I should have, because I'm the EHS professional for my company, but I don't actually have the answer on this. And it's a safe environment. We can say that. And say, look, this is an area that I'm struggling with, or I really need help with. The more we do that, the more we're going to get out of it. But I think that also comes with familiarity as well. So the more occasions that there are for these groups to come together and become more familiar with the people that are in the room, the safer they'll feel about saying, hey, great seeing you a few months ago, here's what I'm working on, and there'll be a bit more openness. The networking is always a bit of a challenge when you're trying to fit it in the few spaces between the sessions and the day, but I think more of that is critical as well.